By the time I pushed through the diner's back door, the wind felt like it had teeth. Philly winter always does that thing where it sneaks under your coat and bites your ribs, like it's personal. My hands were raw from hot water and soap, my shoulders stiff from stacking plates for hours, and my brain kept replaying the same little math problem: tips minus bus fare minus daycare, late fee minus rent. That was already overdue. I had $47 in crumpled bills and coins. I knew because I counted it twice under the flickering security light. The way you count when you're hoping the numbers will change if you stare hard enough. In my head, Lily's voice from earlier floated up like a warm breath on cold glass. Her asking if I'd be home for bedtime, if I'd remember the purple storybook, if I'd kiss her forehead the way I always do. I hadn't answered her with words. I'd answered by picking up another shift. My backpack thumped against my spine as I walked. Anatomy flashcards inside, a half-eaten granola bar, a cheap pair of gloves with a seam splitting at the thumb. I kept my chin down and my pace quick, the way you learn to do when you've walked home alone too many nights and you can't afford to look like prey. Franklin Street was quiet in that wrong way, like the city was holding its breath. Snow grit crunched under my shoes. One streetlight blinked on and off, turning the sidewalk into a stuttering film reel. I could have taken the longer route with more traffic, but the bus had already passed, and every minute I delayed was another minute. Lily stayed awake waiting for me, so I cut through the narrow side lane beside a closed storefront, telling myself I'd done it 100 times. That's when my toe caught something soft, and my whole body jerked forward. At first I thought it was trash. A bundled coat, a dropped duffel. Then I saw the shoes, dark leather, polished, the kind that doesn't belong in a lane that smells like old beer and exhaust. I froze, then crouched, my breath making little clouds as I leaned closer. A boy, teenager, too still. Nursing school doesn't teach you bravery. It teaches you steps. Check airway, check breathing, check circulation. My fingers found his wrist, searching for a pulse through the cold. It was there, faint, but steady. His skin felt clammy, and his lips had that washed out, almost bluish pale that makes your stomach drop. No blood, no obvious injury, just a body running out of fuel. His coat was expensive. Cashmere, maybe. Under it, a private school crest stitched onto a uniform blazer, perfectly neat, except for the way he'd collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. This kid had money wrapped around him like armor, and still he'd ended up here. I patted his pockets for anything ID, medical bracelet, a wallet. My hand closed around a phone in a sleek case that probably cost more than my winter boots. The screen lit up with a single option, bright and simple. Emergency contact, DAD. I stared at it, my thumb hovering, my heart hammering. What would you do if the only help you could call belonged to a stranger who might be worse than the dark around you? I thought about Lily's small hands, and how losing me would leave her alone in a world that never waits for the weak kids. My thumb came down anyway, and the call started to ring. The phone rang once, twice, and then the line opened with a quiet inhale that made my skin tighten. Whoever answered didn't waste a syllable on confusion. The silence itself felt like a question aimed at my throat. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady, and explained what my hands already knew. A teen boy, unconscious in a side lane, breathing but cold, no visible injury, signs pointing to a dangerous blood sugar drop. I said I was a nursing student, that I could keep him stable, if I knew what I was dealing with and if help came fast enough. The man's response arrived like a lock clicking shut. He wanted details only, and he wanted control. In my head, I heard him laying down rules. I was not to drag the boy anywhere, not to flag down a car, not to call an ambulance, not to involve anyone else. He would reach us in minutes. And until then, my job was warmth and breath. My stomach argued, because every training poster says call for help, but the way he spoke made me believe help was already moving. I tucked my scarf around the boy's neck and rubbed his hands. Kneeling on the gritty snow, I checked his pulse again, then counted breaths the way I'd practiced on mannequins and real patients who never knew my name. His lashes were rimed with tiny crystals of ice. I pressed 2 fingers to the soft spot under his jaw, watched for the rise of his chest, and tried to ignore the cold creeping into my knees. Lily's face flashed in my mind, sleepy, trusting, and I hated that I wasn't home. I told myself I was doing this so she'd grow up believing people stop even when the world tells them to keep walking. Headlights swept the mouth of the lane like a searchlight, and a black SUV slid to the curb with no screech, no hesitation. It looked wrong here. Too clean, too expensive, like a chess piece dropped onto a cracked board. Doors opened, and 3 men stepped out in sync, scanning corners, rooftops, shadows. Their movements weren't frantic, they were practiced. The middle one came toward me with a steady stride that made the street feel smaller. He wore a dark coat that fit perfectly and carried himself like he'd never apologized. Not to the cold, not fear, not to anyone. He didn't introduce himself the way normal people do. He crouched beside the boy first, as if the rest of the world could wait. Up close, his face was sharp and tired in a controlled way, dark eyes flicking over Ethan's skin, lips, the angle of his head. When his gaze hit mine, it was like being weighed and categorized. Then his attention snapped back to his son. From inside his coat, he pulled a compact kit, the kind you'd expect from a paramedic, not a stranger in an alley. His hands didn't shake. That steadiness scared me than shouting. He worked fast, checking the monitor clipped to Ethan's waistband, then pressing something sweet against his gums while he prepared a small injection. I recognized the rhythm. Confirm the crash, correct it, watch for breathing to smooth out. He murmured information like a report, letting me know Ethan had type 1 diabetes and that this wasn't the first time the numbers had tried to steal him. I held Ethan's shoulder to keep him from rolling, my gloves slipping on his expensive fabric. The man's focus never drifted, even when footsteps scraped behind us as if danger was just background noise. Minutes stretched, then snapped. Color crept back into Ethan's cheeks like dawn, and his eyelids fluttered. He blinked up at the man above him, confusion sharpening into recognition, and a weak sound escaped him, half complaint, half relief. The man's mouth tightened, and for a split second the armor slipped. I saw a father behind the reputation I could almost smell. He adjusted Ethan's collar, checked his hands for warmth, and kept his voice low, as if softness had to be rationed. My own lungs finally remembered to take a full breath too. When Ethan tried to sit, I supported him, feeling the strange mix of his expensive clothes and his fragile weight. The SUV's interior light spilled onto the snow, clean and bright, and I caught the other men watching the street like it owed them secrets. The man finally offered his name in the same tone he'd used to give orders. Damian Cross. It landed heavy, like a headline. Ethan, still woozy, admitted he'd forgotten his emergency kit after practice and thought he could make it home. Damian's expression softened, then hardened again like he was saving anger for later, safely. I told myself my part was done. A life had stayed in the world, and that should have been enough. I started backing away, already picturing Lily's door and the way she'd scold me with sleepy eyes for being late. Damian's attention snapped to me again, and he stopped me with a single wordless look. I braced for the usual thing people offer when they think money can scrub away a moment. Cash, folded bills, pity. My spine stiffened. Instead, he reached into his pocket and held out a card as plain as it was expensive. Silver numbers, nothing else. His meaning was clear without him raising his voice. This wasn't a reward, it was a summons. The number was embossed. No name, no company. Just the promise that someone would answer when I called. He'd noticed my hands and my choices, the way powerful men notice things, like observations become verdicts. He wanted medical knowledge and discretion, someone who didn't panic and didn't pry. My pride wanted to drop the card into the snow. My bank account and Lily's needs leaned hard the other way. I slid it into my pocket like contraband and pretended hands were not shaking. The SUV swallowed Ethan, and the lane emptied as quickly as it had filled. The men moved with the efficiency you usually see in hospitals, except their uniforms were tailored coats and their equipment stayed hidden. When the doors shut, the streetlight's flicker returned, and the quiet rushed back in like water. I stood there with my scarf damp from snow and breath, wondering if I'd done the right thing by not calling an ambulance. Would you have trusted a stranger's command over training? I didn't have certainty. I only had the memory of Ethan's pulse under my fingers. I walked faster, as if the cold had a timer. The card in my pocket pressed my thigh with each step, heavier than paper should be. I pictured Damian Cross in the SUV, eyes on his son, jaw tight, the kind of man who could buy time when bodies failed. Then I pictured Lily asleep without me, curled around her stuffed bunny, heater clicking like it was tired too. The contrast made my throat sting. Wealth and danger on one side, my life on the other. Ethan's clean shoes kept flashing in my mind, proof he'd fallen from another world. By the time I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my fingers were numb and my cheeks burned from wind. I let myself in quietly, stepping over Lily's tiny sneakers by the door. She was asleep on the couch under a blanket, hair sticking up. The TV paused on a cartoon she'd used to stay awake. I carried her to bed, breathing in baby shampoo and crayons, and guilt rolled through me. After I tucked her in, I spread my cash on the counter and set the card beside it. Two kinds of weight, side by side, daring me back. Sleep didn't come. When I closed my eyes, I saw the blinking streetlight and Ethan's pale face, and I heard the calm that felt like a threat. I ran possibilities the way I study meds. Risk, side effects, consequences. Who gives a nameless card and calls it an opportunity? Who orders you not to call an ambulance and arrives fast enough to save a life? The answer forming in my chest scared me, but so did the truth that he'd been competent. Competence can feel like safety when you're desperate. I watched Lily breathe and promised myself I'd be careful. I left the card on my nightstand like it might crawl away if I blinked. The silver numbers caught the streetlight leaking through the blinds, turning paper into something that looked alive. I sat in the hallway, listening to Lily breathe, letting the quiet remind me what I was protecting. My pride rehearsed reasons to ignore that number. My fear listed reasons I couldn't. In the end, it wasn't bravery that decided it. It was responsibility. I didn't dial that night. I told myself I would call in the morning, when my hands were steady and my thoughts less tangled. What stayed with me wasn't the SUV or the men moving like shadows. It was Damian's look after Ethan's color returned. He didn't look at me with pity or hunger. He assessed, like he was reading a file no one had written. My cracked nails, my diner stains, the way I bristled at charity but didn't flinch at danger. I'd spent years trying to be invisible, because invisible women don't get targeted. In that lane, I stopped being invisible. He saw exhaustion and poverty, sure, but he also saw the choice I made to kneel in the snow for Ethan. I can still remember the card's texture, stiff edges and perfect corners, too clean for my world. After they left, I stood alone and turned it over, hoping it would explain itself. It didn't. Just a number, and the faint scent of cologne on my fingertips. A normal man would have offered cash and walked away. Damian offered a door. Doors have thresholds. I kept wondering what waited on the other side, safety or a cage. In that cold, those options looked similar. I tucked the card into my pocket and walked home with that question beating beside my heart. Back home, the heat was uneven and the silence felt crowded. Lily slept with one fist curled under her cheek, and I stared until my guilt softened into resolve. My life was built from small compromises, extra shifts, cheap groceries, study time stolen in 10-minute scraps. I'd sworn I would never choose danger for her. Then I understood. Danger can find you when you do the right thing. The card waited on my nightstand like a dare. I didn't know Damian Cross's world, but it had already brushed mine. If it was coming closer, I wanted to see it coming. I rehearsed what I might say, silently, the way I practice a clinical report before rounds. Found him, unconscious, breathing, stable now. Then I realized I wasn't calling about Ethan anymore. I was calling about the door Damian had cracked open in front of me. The promise of money that could change everything for Lily. The shadow of trouble that never comes with receipts. I rolled the card between my fingers until the edges warmed. My thumb hovered over my phone, then pulled back. Not tonight. In the morning, when daylight would make this choice feel less like a leap. In bed, I listened to the city outside our window and wondered how many lives were rewriting in the dark. The card waited on my nightstand, silver numbers catching faint light. I picked it up once more and held it in my palm, feeling the weight of a stranger's world against my skin. My mind replayed the alley, the boy on the snow, the father who arrived like midnight and left me with a choice. Tomorrow I would press that number. I would let the line connect. I would learn whether this opportunity meant salvation, destruction, or both for Lily. I didn't sleep so much as drift in and out of a shallow, itchy kind of waking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that alley again. The flickering light, Ethan's too pale face, the way Damian Cross had arrived like the city's shadow given human form. The business card stayed on my nightstand, angled under the weak lamp like it wanted attention. Silver numbers, no name. A door with no handle on my side. Around midnight, I got up and did what I always do when life turns into a knot. I organized, not because it fixes anything, but because it gives my hands something to do while my mind panics. I lined up the bills on the kitchen counter like evidence. The overdue rent notice with my landlord's red stamp, the daycare slip reminding me Lily's weekly fee was due, along with a polite warning about late pickups that didn't feel polite. My community college tuition statement, already marked with a balance that looked like a cliff. A grocery receipt with the cheapest things I could find. Boxed pasta, store-brand cereal, eggs, frozen peas. My bank app glared back at me like a disappointed parent. I counted my tips again. I checked my work schedule. I did the math 3 different ways, hoping one version would include a miracle. Then I went into Lily's room. She was curled on her side in hand-me-down pajamas that had faded cartoon stars. One knee tucked up like she was still trying to make herself smaller in the world. Her hair fanned across the pillow, and her lips were parted in that soft, trusting way kids have when they believe someone is always coming back. I brushed my fingers over her forehead and let my chest ache. I'd promised her a stable life. Instead, I kept handing her new versions of the same struggle. Different apartments, different couches, different nights when I came home too late. I stood there listening to her breathe and asked myself the question I hated most. What if I can't do this alone? The card answered from the nightstand without making a sound. By the time the sky started to turn that bruised winter gray, my decision had already formed. Not cleanly, not bravely. More like a bruise itself, spreading in a place I couldn't ignore. I needed money. I needed stability. I needed a way to finish school without destroying Lily's childhood in the process. And if a man like Damian Cross wanted something from me, pretending it didn't matter wouldn't protect us. It would just make me blind. I made coffee that tasted burnt because I'd stretched the grounds too thin. I ate half a slice of toast and left the rest for Lily. I laid out her clothes for preschool even though she wasn't going today. I'd already called in a favor from the only person I trusted with her. Miss June Haskins lived 2 doors down, a retired librarian with kind eyes and a no-nonsense mouth. She'd watched Lily in emergencies before. The way community holds you up when the system won't. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't. I only told her I had an appointment that might change our situation, and I needed her to keep Lily safe for a few hours. Miss June didn't pry. She just showed up in her puffy coat and told Lily she'd brought stickers and hot chocolate. Lily's grin was so wide it cracked something in me. When Lily ran back to hug my legs, I crouched and held her a second longer than normal. I pressed my cheek to her hair and breathed in that sweet kid scent. In my head, her earlier question floated up again. The one that always hits like a dart. If I leave, will I come back? I promised myself I would. Then I picked up the card. My thumb hovered over the numbers. I almost laughed at how dramatic it felt, like I was about to join a different life just by making a call. But it wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Doors open for a reason. Sometimes you're invited in. Sometimes you're pulled. I dialed. The line connected so fast it made my stomach flip. A woman answered with a crisp tone that sounded like expensive paper. She didn't ask who I was in the way a normal receptionist would. She said my name like it was already printed on her tongue. Mia Carter. And then she confirmed my address as if she were checking a delivery schedule. She didn't say it with menace. She didn't have to. The implication did the work. My grip tightened on the phone. My brain tried to sprint through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had Damian run a background check overnight? Was this how his world worked? Information moving faster than sleep? What else did they know? Lily's school? My class schedule? The diner where I'd spent years washing dishes like my life depended on it? The woman gave instructions with the same clean certainty. I was to arrive in 2 hours. Not 2 hours-ish. Not whenever I could. 2 hours. She gave an address that didn't fit in my mental map of Philadelphia. Something that sounded like old money and wide lawns. Then she ended the call like I was an appointment, not a person. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, breathing hard, and felt the first real twist of fear. I hadn't introduced myself. I hadn't offered details. And still, they had me labeled and located. The opportunity wasn't waiting at a door. It had already wrapped around my wrists. Soft, polite, tight. What would you do if the one option that could save your kid also proved it could find you whenever it wanted? I looked down the hall at Lily, already peeling sticker sheets with Miss June, giggling. I imagined that laughter getting interrupted by strangers asking questions, by pressure sliding into our life like smoke. A man like Damian Cross didn't just hand out numbers. He moved pieces, and apparently I had become one. I dressed quickly, choosing the least worn jeans I owned and a sweater without a stain. I packed my backpack like I was going to class, because it made me feel like I still belonged to my own life. Flashcards, notebook, a pen that barely wrote. I added a small Ziploc bag with glucose tabs and a juice box from Lily's snack stash on instinct, a habit from clinical rotations. My hands didn't stop moving. Before I left, I knelt by Lily and told her I'd be back before she could miss me too much. I didn't use quotes, because I didn't even trust the words. I just pressed my forehead to hers and let her see my face, like proof I was real. Lily nodded with the serious trust kids have, then went back to stickers like the world wasn't heavy yet. I walked out into the cold with my shoulders up. The card's number burned into my memory like a scar. A black car was waiting at the curb. Not a taxi. not a rideshare. A driver in a dark coat stepped out and opened the back door, as if he'd been trained to do it without making it look like service. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't confirm my name. He looked at me once, polite and blank, and then he waited. The street behind him looked the same as always. Cracked sidewalk, trash can tipped over, someone's radio playing faintly through a window, but the car made it feel like my block had been chosen for something. I got in because my feet wouldn't move away. Philadelphia slid past the window in layers. Row homes and corner stores gave way to cleaner streets, then to stretches of road lined with bare trees like ribs. My stomach tightened as the scenery changed. Wealth in this city doesn't announce itself with signs. It announces itself by removing the clutter. No flyers taped to poles, no busted streetlights, no people standing on corners with tired eyes. Just space, quiet, control. We reached gates that looked like they belonged in a movie. Tall iron bars with stone pillars and cameras tucked into angles like insects. A guard booth sat to the side, glass darkened. The driver didn't speak. He handed over something, and the gates opened as if the property recognized the car. Inside, the driveway curved through manicured shrubs dusted with snow. The mansion appeared slowly, huge and pale, a limestone face with too many windows. It wasn't warm-looking. It was impressive in a way that made you feel small for breathing near it. My palms were sweating inside my gloves. I thought of Lily in Miss June's apartment, sipping hot chocolate, and the guilt hit me again. I had left her for this. For money I hadn't seen, for a man who could find my address before I said hello. The driver let me out at the front steps. The air smelled cleaner here, like the world had been scrubbed. A door opened before I could knock. A woman with neat hair and an expression that hovered between professional and curious ushered me into a wide foyer. The floors shone. The ceiling was high enough to echo my footsteps like they were someone else's. I kept my shoulders squared. I kept my face calm. My mother used to say you could be scared, but you couldn't look scared, because people who liked control hunted for softness the way wolves sniff blood. I hadn't seen my mother in years, but her voice still lived in my spine. I was led down a hallway lined with framed art I couldn't name. There were cameras in corners, subtle, like the house was always watching itself. There were men standing still in places that didn't need a man to stand still. Hands folded, eyes scanning. Not butlers. Not regular security either. Something in between. I was brought to a study that smelled like leather and old paper. Books lined the walls. A desk sat like a throne. Damian Cross stood near the window, looking out at the gray morning as if the world outside belonged to him. Up close, he looked the way he'd looked in the alley. Controlled, sharp, expensive. In all the quiet ways. He didn't smile. His gaze landed on me and stayed there long enough to strip away my pretending. He saw the diner girl and the nursing student. He saw the single mom with cheap shoes trying not to flinch. And he didn't look away. He didn't waste time. He laid out facts like he was placing cards on a table. Ethan's condition was volatile. He needed constant monitoring, and their previous medical companion was gone. He needed someone with training, discretion, and the kind of instincts that made a person stop in the snow for a stranger. He needed someone who could be trusted to keep Ethan alive without making Ethan feel like a prisoner. Then he named the pay. $6,500 a week. Housing, food, tuition covered. The numbers hit me like a slap. My first reaction wasn't excitement. It was suspicion. Money like that doesn't come without a price. I felt my pride rise like a wall. I felt my fear slip under it. I forced my face into something neutral. The expression you wear in a hospital when someone tells you a diagnosis you don't like. Inside, my mind did that desperate math again. With that salary, I could pay rent. I could fix my credit. I could finish school. I could buy Lily new clothes that actually fit. I could stop measuring groceries by pennies. But a voice in me whispered that money is also a leash. Damian explained the role in terms that sounded clinical but felt like a cage. Live in. Accompany Ethan to school functions and appointments. Track his glucose levels. Make sure he eats. Make sure he carries his kit. Make sure he doesn't pretend he's fine when his body is not. Be present. Be invisible. Never be foolish. I challenged it in my head and then out loud without quoting myself. I tried to shape it into something I understood. Nurse, babysitter, assistant. Because labels matter. Labels decide whether you are respected or owned. Damian reframed it with the same calm. Medical monitor, companion, someone with authority over Ethan's health, and someone who understood that information was dangerous here. I told him about Lily, because Lily is not negotiable. I made it clear I couldn't vanish into his world and leave my daughter behind like a suitcase. I needed time for school. I needed boundaries. I needed a life that didn't swallow mine whole. Damian listened without moving, and that stillness made me more nervous than an argument would have. Then he offered solutions that sounded generous and felt like strings. Lily could stay on the property. Childcare could be arranged. Transportation to my classes could be provided. My schedule could be optimized. He said it like he was adjusting a business plan, and that was the part that made my throat tighten. A single mom doesn't get her life optimized by strangers. She fights for scraps of time. He wasn't offering help. He was offering control wrapped in velvet. A door slammed somewhere in the house. Footsteps came fast, and before I could turn fully, Ethan burst into the study like a storm. He looked healthier than he had in the snow, but there was a brittle edge to him, like he was made of pride and caffeine and grief. His hair was messy. His face was sharp in the way teenagers are when they're growing faster than their emotions can keep up. His eyes flicked to me with instant blame. I could tell exactly what he thought without him saying it. I was the stranger who'd seen him weak. I was the proof that his body could betray him. I was the new rule his father was forcing into his life. Ethan's anger wasn't really about me. It was about losing control in front of someone outside the family. It was about being 14 and wanting to be normal when your pancreas refuses. It was about grief that had nowhere safe to land. He made his objection clear in the way only a teenager can. All heat and stubbornness. Damian countered with a coldness that didn't quite hide fear. He referenced the number of episodes Ethan had had recently, the way last night could have ended differently, and the way his decisions were not negotiable. The tone between them was a familiar war. A kid trying to be free, a father trying to keep him alive. Ethan's glare stayed on me, and for a moment I wanted to apologize for existing. Then I remembered Lily. I remembered that guilt doesn't keep children safe. Competence does. So I held Ethan's gaze and didn't flinch. Not in a challenge, but in a quiet promise. I wasn't here to shame him. I was here because bodies don't care about pride. Ethan left the room with the same theatrical force he'd entered, the door slamming again like punctuation. A heavy silence followed, and in it I noticed small things. Damian's jaw was tight. His hands were still, but the tendons looked pulled. On the desk, a thick file sat near the corner, like it had been waiting to be opened. Damian's voice shifted, just slightly. The steel stayed, but something hollow moved underneath it. He told me Ethan's mother had been killed 3 years ago. He didn't use poetic language. He didn't soften it. He framed it the way a man in his position would. She was used as a message, a strike against him, an attempt to prove that even powerful men bleed. My stomach turned cold. In the hospital, grief is private, but it is also common. People lose spouses every day. Still, the way Damian described it made it sound like part of a war, not a tragedy, as if love itself had been turned into a weakness to exploit. Damian explained that after her death, Ethan changed. Stress, trauma, nightmares, anger, and Ethan's diabetes became harder to manage because hormones and fear and adrenaline don't politely stay out of your bloodstream. A body under siege does not regulate well. My nursing brain clicked into place. Psychological stress can absolutely spike glucose, crash it, make it swing wildly. The numbers are not just about food and insulin. They are about safety, about sleep, about whether your nervous system believes you're going to survive the night. I thought about counseling, about therapy, about the way kids carry grief in their stomachs and skin. I wondered if Ethan had ever been allowed to talk to someone without it becoming strategy. I wondered if Damian had, either. And then another thought slid in behind it. In a house like this, vulnerability isn't just personal. It's tactical. The truth settled over me slowly, like snow covering something ugly. Ethan's illness wasn't simply a medical condition here. It was a potential weapon, a leverage point, a crack in armor that other men could pry open, the same way they had pried open Damian's heart by taking his wife. I sat in that study with my hands folded tight and realized this wasn't an interview for a job. It was an invitation into a conflict I didn't understand, where a child's body could be used like a battlefield map, where my daughter could become a pressure point if I wasn't careful, where a paycheck could come bundled with danger and obligation. Damian looked at me like he was waiting for my answer, but he didn't push. He didn't have to. The number had already pushed. The gates, the cameras, the way his staff had known my name, the way solutions formed in his mouth before I finished a thought. It was all the same message. If I stepped in, I wouldn't step out easily. I thought of Lily again, of Miss June's apartment, of the rent notice with its red stamp, of the diner grease trapped under my nails, of my nursing textbook with pages highlighted by cheap yellow marker. I thought of Ethan's face in the snow, and how close he'd been to not waking up. What would you choose if the only path to safety also demanded you surrender pieces of yourself? I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired. I felt responsible. I felt the weight of 2 children's lives pressing into my ribs from different directions. When I stood to leave, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Damian didn't stop me. He simply made it clear that the offer would not wait forever, and that if I accepted, the rules would be strict. He emphasized discretion again, the way you emphasize a medication allergy. Forget it, and someone dies. I walked back through the hallway with its quiet eyes and polished floors. The air seemed thinner now that I knew what lived underneath it. I passed a door with a keypad, another with a heavy lock that looked too modern for the old architecture. I passed a man in a dark coat who watched me without moving his head. I felt my stomach clench. Outside, the cold hit my face like a reset, but it didn't clear the feeling. It only sharpened it. In the car ride back, my phone buzzed with a photo. Miss June sent, Lily grinning, hot chocolate foam on her upper lip, sticker sheets scattered like confetti. Relief hit me hard enough to make my eyes sting. Lily was safe. For now. I stared out the window at the gray trees and accepted what my mind had been circling since the woman on the phone said my name. This wasn't a rich family hiring help. This was a power structure recruiting a shield, and I had already been pulled close enough to matter. When the car dropped me back on my block, everything looked the same and different at once. The cracked sidewalk, the familiar trash can, the neighbor's radio. My ordinary life, still standing, but now marked by an invisible line that led straight to Damian Cross's gates. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, gathered Lily into my arms, and held her until her little hands patted my cheeks like she was checking I was real. "Miss," June asked with her eyes if I was okay, and I nodded because I didn't have words. Not yet. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and spread my bills out again. I placed the business card beside them, even though I didn't have it physically anymore. It was in my head now. $6,500 a week. Tuition covered. Live-in. Discretion. Rules. A boy who hated being watched. A father who didn't know how to stop controlling the world long enough to grieve. I pictured Ethan's defiance, and underneath it, the scared kid who'd thought he could make it home without his kit. I pictured Damian's face when he said his wife had been killed, and how the grief had slipped through the cracks of his discipline like water through stone. I pictured Lily's hot chocolate smile and felt my protective instinct sharpen into something almost fierce. If I stepped into Damian's world, I would have to learn its language. I would have to recognize traps before they closed. I would have to protect Lily in a place where protection came with strings, and strings could become knots. I wasn't deciding whether to take a job. I was deciding whether to step onto a board where people played with lives like pieces. And in my gut, I already knew the next part wasn't about saying yes or no. It was about surviving what I had already triggered the moment I pressed DAD. Lily's suitcase was a plastic tote with a cracked lid, the kind you get free after a move, and it looked ridiculous beside the black town car waiting outside Miss June's building. I kissed Miss June's cheek, thanked her for the snacks, and tried not to show how my throat tightened when Lily waved goodbye like this was an adventure. The driver took our bags without asking and opened the door for us. As we rolled toward the main line, Lily pressed her nose to the glass, and I counted my breaths, wondering which part of me I was selling. The gates opened before we stopped, iron sliding apart with a quiet confidence that made my old neighborhood feel louder in comparison. Cameras sat in the stone like eyes. Inside, the driveway curved through bare trees and trimmed hedges dusted with snow. Lily whispered to herself, amazed, and I felt both relieved and ashamed that wonder could be bought. A woman met us in the foyer, short and steady, with hands and a warm smile that did not feel fake. Mrs. Alvarez guided us toward a suite and told me, without saying too much, that this house ran for Ethan. Our things took up half a dresser drawer. Lily's coloring books looked lonely on a mahogany desk. My thrift store coats hung beside garments that never touched a clearance rack, and the contrast made my stomach pinch. Mrs. Alvarez unpacked with respect, folding Lily's pajamas like they were silk, asking where Lily liked her nightlight, where I kept snacks for Lowe's, where I wanted my textbooks. Down the hall, footsteps moved in patterns, doors opening and closing on a schedule I did not know. People nodded at me, but their eyes measured, like I was being fitted into a system. By the second day, I could tell which rooms belonged to life and which belonged to business. The kitchen smelled like bread and lemon polish, and Lily started treating it like safe ground, dragging a chair to the counter for apples and peanut butter. Then there were the hallways that went quiet when certain men appeared. The ones who looked like staff until you noticed their posture, their earpieces hidden by hair, the way their hands stayed free. Some doors were always unlocked for me. Others had keypads and a rule I felt in my bones. Do not test them. Nights were the strangest. Around dinner, the air changed, like the house inhaled and held it. Mrs. Alvarez would steer Lily and me back to our wing, and I learned to take that hint without asking why. Ethan learned it too. He would wander into my doorway with his monitor in his hand, pretending he needed help, when what he really needed was a witness that he was not alone. From the other side of the mansion came muted footsteps, low voices, the soft click of doors sealing. I read anatomy beside Lily's bed, listening to silence that felt occupied. Ethan did not become friendly because I moved in. He became strategic. Some mornings he ignored me completely, marching past with his backpack and a scowl like I was a new piece of furniture. Other mornings he watched me from the corner of his eye, testing whether I would report every snack or every missed check to his father. I built a routine anyway. Pre-breakfast readings, spare supplies packed, an emergency kit that went everywhere, and quiet reminders delivered like facts, not lectures. I handled his pride like bruised skin, gentle but firm. Over time, he stopped bracing for punishment. The first time Ethan's numbers dipped fast, it hid in the kitchen while his father was elsewhere, and the staff pretended not to notice. Ethan's face went pale, and his hands trembled before he could hide them. I refused to make a scene. I guided him into a chair, passed him juice, and watched his breathing while my mind counted minutes. I kept everything quiet so he could keep his dignity. When his color returned, he studied me with surprise, like I had protected him from embarrassment. Trust started there. I did not tell Damian, and Ethan's shoulders finally loosened. Mrs. Alvarez became my anchor. She showed Lily where the pantry snacks were, which drawer held children's cups, and how to ask for help without feeling small. She also taught me the mansion's rhythm with small gestures. A tap on my elbow when a corridor was off limits, a raised eyebrow when a stranger in a suit walked in, a redirect back to our wing. Her kindness was real, but it came wrapped in caution. The warmth here had rules. When staff smiled at me, some smiles felt like welcome, and others felt like appraisal, as if I were on probation. One afternoon I was wiping marker off Lily's fingers when two men I assumed were gardeners drifted past the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the name Vale cut through, and I heard late shipment in docks before my brain could turn away. I froze, towel dripping, trying not to look guilty. Ethan came in, read my face, and gave a tiny headshake that warned me off. He kept moving like nothing happened. Later, during his check, he made it clear in his cautious teenage way that questions could get people hurt, and not knowing could keep you alive. That was when I learned the house's real language. It was timing, eye contact, and what you pretended not to notice. I hated how fast I adapted. In my old life, questions kept you alive. Here, curiosity felt like a match near gasoline. I kept Lily close, hand in mine, memorizing which staff carried warmth and which carried neutrality. Some days she skipped down the corridor like it was a museum. Other days she said the big house was listening. I told her we were safe, and I did not know if it was true. Uncertainty stayed in my chest. About a week in, I caught Damian in a side hall before the house fully woke. His coat was unbuttoned, and his knuckles were bruised in a pattern I knew from the ER. He saw my glance and met it, silently testing whether I would comment. I could have offered ice or questions. Instead, I picked the safer path and talked through Ethan's schedule in my head, supplies, and the next check. I gave Damian clinical neutrality, nothing to use against me. His shoulders loosened, and I understood that discretion was currency here. I felt it settle into my bones. Later that morning, Noah Reed appeared at my door, introduced as part of routine, not a threat. Damian's decision was obvious. Any outing beyond the gates now required protocol. School visit, medical appointment, even a simple walk. All of it would include extra eyes. Lily liked Noah immediately because he crouched to her level and carried her backpack. I did not. I thanked him anyway, because manners are armor. Inside, I felt the boundary tighten. Protection had shifted from a promise to policy, and policy does not ask permission. I wondered when safety became ownership, and whether I could refuse. The first time we left with Noah, I packed Ethan's kit like it was my heart. Juice, tabs, sensors, spare supplies, all checked twice. Lily brought her stuffed bunny, and I let her, because comfort matters when adults build walls. At the front doors, Cameras shifted to follow us, and the guard's nod felt like permission and warning. Ethan walked beside me with his hood up, pretending he did not care. Beyond the hedges, the city waited. In that moment, I understood the mansion's teeth were not just to keep danger out. They were also to keep us in, too. That night, I stood in the bathroom, washing Lily's hair, and watched her tilt her head under the warm water as if she had never known cold. I thought about my old apartment, the thin walls, the sirens, the way I used to brace for footsteps on the stairs. Here the walls were thick, the locks modern, and the danger quieter. Ethan's body was the obvious vulnerability, but I could see others forming. Lily's laughter, my school dreams, my need for money. Damian called it protection, and part of me believed him. Another part recognized containment. If I wanted to keep the children safe, I would have to learn this house's rules faster than anyone could use us. And soon we would leave the gates again. Lily's bedtime became a little ritual of repair. Mrs. Alvarez found a nightlight shaped like a moon, and Lily insisted it stay on, even though the room was bigger than our old living room. I read a short story from memory, because I had left her purple book behind, and my guilt sat beside me like a third body. After she drifted off, I walked the suite and checked every window latch without thinking. When I caught myself doing it, I felt a chill of recognition. I was adapting, the way Ethan adapted, the way Damian had adapted. All of us making room for fear and calling it preparation. Breakfast became our daily negotiation. Mrs. Alvarez set plates down with the same calm she used for Lily's cereal, but her eyes flicked to Ethan's monitor like a second clock. Ethan tried to act casual, grabbing toast and leaving too fast, because lingering meant being supervised. I learned to watch without staring, to ask for a quick check like it was routine, not surveillance. Lily liked sitting near Ethan, showing him drawings as if he were just an older cousin. Sometimes he rolled his eyes, but he never pushed her away. I saw the boy under the armor for once. I started mapping the mansion the way you map a hospital unit. The safe routes were the ones with windows and family portraits. The risky routes were the ones with no art and too much silence. A brass door near the west stairs never opened, not even for Mrs. Alvarez, and I stopped walking past it after I noticed fresh scuff marks on the floor. When certain visitors arrived, men in suits appeared as if they had been waiting in the walls, and the staff's smiles went thin. Ethan drifted closer to me then, because my presence steadied him slightly. One evening, Ethan did homework at the kitchen table while Lily colored beside him. 2 security men passed the doorway, and I caught shipment cleared and Vale pushing again. My pencil froze. The urge to ask rose like acid. Ethan looked up and gave me the same tiny warning as before. I swallowed it and kept my attention on homework, pretending my ears were not working. Later, during his check, he acknowledged in his guarded way that he noticed my restraint. In this house, silence was not weakness. It was a survival skill. I hated how quickly it became natural. Damian rarely joined meals, but when he did, the table tightened around his quiet authority. He spoke little and listened like he was collecting facts. I watched him watch Ethan, and saw fear hidden behind control, the same way mine hid behind busy hands. His gaze sometimes landed on Lily, and the hardness softened, just briefly, as if he remembered childhood should be protected. When his gaze found me, it was not romance, just recognition. He had chosen me for a reason, and I was living inside that choice. The question was whether I was safe or useful to him. My phone buzzed with school reminders, but now they came layered with protocol. Noah checked routes. Mrs. Alvarez confirmed snacks. Ethan recited appointment dates like he was reclaiming control. Lily adapted faster than I did, learning which window seat caught sun and which staff member slipped her an extra cookie. Seeing her relax brought relief and dread. Relief because she felt safe. Dread because safety here felt like something Damian could grant or revoke. When Noah mentioned an endocrinology appointment coming up, I nodded like it was routine, but my gut warned me the world outside the gates was waiting. That night I washed Lily's hair and watched her relax under warm water like she had forgotten winter. I remembered my old apartment, thin walls and sirens, and realized danger can be loud or quiet. Here it wore floors and locks. Ethan's body was the vulnerability, but I could see others forming. Lily's laughter, my dreams, my need for money. Damian called it protection, and part of me believed him. Another part recognized containment. If I wanted to keep the kids safe, I had to learn this house's rules faster than anyone could use them. Soon we would leave again. Getting Ethan out of the endocrinology clinic felt like stealing a normal afternoon. We had paper bags of sensors and a new prescription tucked in my tote, and Ethan was complaining in that bored teenage way that means he is trying not to be scared. Noah Reed waited by the curb, engine running, eyes scanning the parking lot like it was a map of threats. I held Lily's mittened hand, grateful she stayed with Mrs. Alvarez today, safe inside the gates, not here under fluorescent lights. The cold slapped my cheeks as we climbed in. Told myself it was routine. The first block was quiet, the way suburbs pretend crime is a rumor. Then my old instincts woke up, sharp and ugly. In the side mirror, a black sedan turned when we turned, keeping 3 car lengths back, never rushing, never falling behind. At the next light, it stopped where it should, headlights steady, driver hidden behind tint. My pulse moved into my throat. I watched the sedan through 2 more turns, then a third, and the spacing stayed perfect, like someone had practiced our route. I felt my body react before my mind admitted it. We were being followed. Noah drove like he hadn't noticed, which told me he had. I leaned slightly toward Ethan, keeping my voice low enough that it felt like a shared thought, not a panic. I made it clear we had a tail and that he needed to alert his father's people. Ethan's eyes flicked to the mirror once. Then his face settled into a calm that didn't belong to 14. His fingers moved over his phone under his jacket, fast and practiced. That was when I understood this wasn't a first time for him. The sedan stayed behind us, patient, waiting in silence. 3 minutes later, the world shifted. An unmarked SUV appeared from a side street and slid between us and the sedan like a door closing. A second followed, taking position behind the sedan, boxing it in without touching it. The choreography was so smooth it looked like traffic. Except traffic doesn't move with purpose. Noah didn't speed up. He just kept the pace steady, as if daring the sedan to show its hand. At the next exit, the black car veered off, disappearing. Relief hit sharp, then faded. If they could find us once, they could do it again any time. By the time we reached the estate gates, my hands were still tingling. Ethan stared out the window, jaw tight, pretending he was bored. Noah spoke into a hidden mic and gave short updates that sounded like routine. Routine means this happens often enough to plan for it. Inside the gate, the hedges and stone walls looked the same as always, but now I noticed how high they were, how the cameras tracked the car. I thought of Lily inside with Mrs. Alvarez, unaware her name was already part of someone's list. Safety felt thinner than glass than it should. That evening, a message reached me through staff, quiet but urgent. Damian wanted me in his study. I found him alone, sleeves rolled, a monitor glowing on his desk. Security footage played in a loop. Our car leaving the clinic, the sedan appearing behind us, my head turning toward the mirror. Damian rewound the clip again and again, landing on the exact second my posture changed. He didn't praise me. He assessed me the way I assess vitals. His attention felt heavier than his money, because it suggested I was useful in ways he hadn't planned, and he knew it. I explained without making it dramatic that I grew up reading danger the way some people read street signs. When you've walked home past shuttered stores with keys between your fingers, you learn patterns. Cars that match your speed, headlights that don't change, pauses that feel timed. Damian listened like he was storing my history in a file. His gaze didn't soften, but it sharpened, as if he'd just discovered a hidden feature on a device he already owned. That thought made my stomach twist. I wasn't proud of my instincts. I'd have been naive. But naivety doesn't pay rent. Damian shifted topics as if emotions were distractions. He told me there would be a charity gala, hosted by Graham Vale. The name landed like a warning bell, because I'd heard it whispered in corridors. Damian made it clear we were attending together. Him, Ethan, and me. Not as a family, as a statement. He explained, in clipped facts, that Vale had been trying to confirm Ethan's medical condition, hunting for a weakness to exploit. My presence would show the vulnerability was managed and not hidden. It would also put my face in Vale's memory. My skin prickled at once. On the drive back to my wing, I replayed the logic and felt sick at how clean it was. In my world, you protect your child by keeping them out of trouble. In Damian's world, you protect your child by controlling how enemies see them. Ethan's illness wasn't just medical. It was political. And I, the nurse with the poor girl background, was being placed beside him like proof of strength. I could already sense the gossip, the way rich rooms talk without raising voices. I thought of Lily and wondered what happens when protection turns into a show for them. 3 days later, a box arrived outside my suite, carried in like something fragile. Inside was an emerald dress, smooth and heavy, the kind of fabric I'd only seen behind store glass. A note followed, written with Damian's precision, making one point. Appearance was armor, and Vale would study every detail. I stood there holding the dress and felt the ache of being fitted into a plan. It wasn't romance. It was camouflage. Mrs. Alvarez watched me quietly, then guided Lily away so she wouldn't sense my fear. Lily reached back to touch the silk, wide-eyed, and my chest tightened. Damian's people arranged childcare for Lily during the gala with speed. They didn't ask me for names or numbers. They presented a complete plan already approved as if my daughter were an asset. The efficiency should have comforted me, but it made my skin crawl. Lily was now inside their calendars and security briefings. She had moved from my private life into Damian's orbit. I pictured her small hands at preschool sticky with glue and felt panic rise. In my old world, help came with favors and gratitude. Here, help came with files and protocols. When does protection become leverage? As the gala approached, Ethan's numbers started swinging on days when nothing visible happened. He sat at breakfast, tapping his foot, eyes distant, and I could almost see his nerves burning glucose. I adjusted snacks, kept checks steady, and tried not to make him feel watched. At night, Lily asked why I was practicing walking in the shoes Mrs. Alvarez found for me. I told her it was grown-up work, and she accepted that with child logic. After she slept, I stared at the emerald dress hanging in my closet and imagined a ballroom of smiles measuring our weak points. Damian didn't coach me like a date. He briefed me like an operation. Staff explained where I would stand, when I would move, what role I would wear. The public story was simple. I was his assistant studying nursing. The private story was sharper. I stayed close to Ethan for medical reasons, and Vale's people would notice. Damian wanted them to notice. I nodded while my stomach tightened. Being arranged this way felt like becoming property without paperwork. I kept thinking about that phone call, how my address came back to me before I'd offered it. Maybe choice ended then. My mother instinct went into overdrive. I updated Miss June anyway and asked her to keep her phone close. I wrote Lily's allergies and emergency contacts on an index card, even though Damian's staff had already built their file. I packed Lily's favorite snacks and an extra sweater for her night with the sitter inside the estate, because small comforts matter when adults play games. Mrs. Alvarez reassured me with steady hands and said Lily would be watched. That word made my skin prickle. In my apartment, watched meant danger. Here, watched meant protection. The difference depended on who held eyes. Later, alone, I replayed the tailing car and realized it wasn't about the clinic. It was about access. Someone wanted our patterns, our response times, our weak spots. The unmarked SUVs arrived fast, but not before the message landed. We can reach you beyond your walls. I thought of Ethan's monitor and how enemies could turn a medical fact into a public weakness. Then I thought of Lily. She didn't have a monitor. She had me, and I could be pressured. The cold settled in my throat. How do you keep your child safe when even help comes with strings? Damian ended the meeting with procedure. My outings would be planned and shadowed. I nodded because arguing felt useless. In the hall, Ethan walked ahead with shoulders tight, and I wondered what constant watching does to a kid. Then I thought of Lily and felt fear sharpen. The mansion was warm and stocked, but it was also a fortress with rules I never chose. The tailing sedan proved the outside world could reach us. Damian's protocol proved the inside world could hold us. I kissed Lily's hair and promised myself I would not let the gala make her a target. On the day of the gala, the house moved faster, like it sensed a storm. Mrs. Alvarez steamed the emerald dress and pinned my hair while I watched the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. I looked expensive, which felt like a costume over diner calluses. Ethan paced near the stairs, checking his monitor too often, acting annoyed instead of afraid. Damian appeared in his coat, expression unreadable, and the air tightened. The plan wrapped around us like a script. I packed Ethan's kit, added extra glucose, and reminded myself that competence was the only thing I truly controlled. Before we left, I walked Lily to the playroom where her sitter waited, calm and professional. Lily clutched her bunny and asked if I would be back for bedtime. I promised by keeping my voice steady and my hands gentle. When she skipped toward the toys, guilt hit hard, because she trusted this place more than I did. Noah Reed opened the car door. As I slid inside, I looked back at the mansion's windows and imagined eyes counting my daughter as part of the plan. Protected, yes, but also included. That was the twist I couldn't swallow at all. The drive to Vale's estate felt longer than it was. City lights faded into wide lawns and cars gleaming under winter lamps. Vale's mansion rose bright and welcoming, beauty that felt practiced. Music drifted through the glass. Guests in formal clothes moved like predators pretending to be polite. I checked Ethan's supplies by touch. Damian's profile stayed still, already in battle mode. I pictured Lily behind Damian's gates and felt my stomach twist. One public slip could become leverage. When the doors opened, cold air rushed in, and I stepped out, forcing calm, knowing smiles tonight would hide a question. The Vale estate looked like it had been built to make ordinary people whisper. Limestone steps, heat spilling from tall windows, a doorman who smiled without warmth. My emerald dress clung like polite armor, heavier than any diner apron, and my heels made me feel borrowed from someone else. Damian walked beside me, calm as a sealed envelope, while Ethan stayed close enough that I could read his monitor with a glance. Inside, chandeliers scattered light like frost. Every laugh sounded practiced. I kept my shoulders back and my mother brain awake. I wondered who could ruin child with a smile. The ballroom smelled of perfume, champagne, and old wood polished until it lost its grain. A string quartet played near a marble column, bows moving like tiny blades. Men in tailored suits and women in satin floated in circles, smiling as if kindness was a language they owned. I felt eyes on my hands, on the simple band of my watch, on the way I stood too still. Damian did not float. He moved through the crowd like it parted on instinct, greetings landing on him like tribute. I stayed one step behind, counting exits, measuring distance to my boy. Graham Vale appeared the way a shark appears in clear water, suddenly close without making a splash. His smile was bright, his eyes too patient, and he studied me as if my dress had a price tag only he could read. I watched Damian's posture change by a fraction, like a lock turning. The men around Vale laughed at nothing, hungry to belong. I kept my face neutral and my breath even, reminding myself I was not the story tonight, just a tool in it. Vale's attention slid from Damian to Ethan, then back to me, testing where pain lived. Damian introduced me in that smooth public way that made lies sound like resume lines. In his orbit, I became the assistant who happened to study nursing, the practical detail that explained why I hovered near Ethan without looking suspicious. I felt the room accept it, not because they believed it, but because it was useful for their game. Damian's hand settled at the small of my back, a gentle pressure that guided me through clusters of guests. It was strategic, a signal that I belonged on his side. Still, warmth crawled up my neck, confusing and unwanted in me. Ethan stayed unusually quiet, the loudest teenager in the room by sheer effort of silence. He kept near me, shoulders slightly hunched, scanning faces the way I used to scan corners walking home. Every few minutes his fingers tapped his monitor, eyes narrowing as numbers shifted. The music, the light, the smiles, all of it was adrenaline, and adrenaline chews through glucose like fire through paper. I offered him sips of water, small snacks, anything that looked casual. Damian watched from the edge of our triangle, pretending not to watch. I could feel his control straining at its seams tonight. People asked me harmless things that weren't harmless at all. Where I studied, how long I'd worked for Damian, what kind of girl leaves her world for his. I answered in short truths that gave nothing away, and I kept thinking of Lily asleep under a moon nightlight, unaware her mom was being appraised like merchandise. How do you smile when you know smiles can be knives? I kept my gaze soft, and my posture steady, because fear invites attention. Vale drifted closer, never rushing, always present at the edge of vision. His interest felt like finger tracing bruise slowly. During dinner, Ethan's leg bounced under the table, frantic. His laugh sounded thin, like it arrived after the joke died. I watched his hands, then his mouth, a slight tremor, his lips losing color, his eyes blinking too often. Nursing school taught me to catch changes before alarms scream. I glanced at his monitor, and my stomach tightened. The number was sliding down in a dangerous line. I leaned closer and signaled, with calm face and steady movement, that we were stepping out for air. If anyone asked, it would look like a brief break so he could breathe again. We slipped through a side corridor lined with portraits, the noise dulling behind us. Ethan tried to walk it off, shoulders squared, but his steps started to drift. I kept a hand near his elbow without grabbing, letting him keep pride while I kept safety. The air outside the terrace doors was colder, cleaner, and it hit him like a wave. His knees softened. His body decided before his mind could. Ethan folded toward the floor, and my training took over. I guided him down, protected his head, and scanned for pulse and airway. Everything narrowed to counts and seconds. I pulled the glucose gel from my clutch and smeared it along his gums, careful and fast, then positioned him on his side so his tongue wouldn't betray him. His skin was cold sweat damp under my palm. I watched his chest rise. I kept my voice steady in my own head, narrating steps like prayer. Stay present. Keep him warm. Do not panic. I checked his monitor again and saw the number creeping up, slow but real. I loosened his tie, brushed hair from his forehead, and held the kit open for when Damian arrived, because I knew he would. Damian burst through the terrace doors with the same too-fast certainty as the alley knight. He saw Ethan on the floor and, for a blink, fear crossed his face, raw and unmistakable, before control sealed it again. He knelt beside us, hands steady, confirming my work and taking over with the ease of repetition. He checked pulse, monitor, breathing, then produced his own kit, adding a warmer pack and a small injection with practiced care. Watching him protect his son was unsettling, because tenderness and threat lived in the same calm movements. He didn't praise me. He just assumed I belonged in this moment. When Ethan's breathing steadied, I looked up and caught the doorway. Graham Vale stood there, half hidden, watching like he'd paid for front row seats. His eyes tracked Ethan's monitor, Damian's hands, then me, and none of it looked like concern. It looked like inventory. The ballroom's laughter leaked through the opening behind him, bright and clueless, while the terrace held its own cold truth. Dread pooled in my gut. Vale had been hunting a weakness, and now he had proof in full view. I understood, with a sick clarity, that in this world a child's illness could become currency tonight. Damian ended the night fast. Ethan was upright again, but shaky, and I kept him close as we threaded back through the gala's bright corridors, heads turning, whispers blooming behind smiles. I felt Vale's attention on my skin like a draft. Outside, cold air hit hard, and the car door shut with finality. Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes, exhausted. Damian's phone glowed against his jaw as he made quiet calls, controlled but urgent. No one spoke to me, yet I knew I was not a bystander. I was evidence now. The drive back stretched, heavy and silent too. Back at the estate, the gates opened like the night was ordinary, and that normalcy felt cruel. Ethan went to his room with Noah nearby, and I stayed long enough to confirm he was stable. Damian's study drew me. He paced with a phone to his ear, voice low, issuing clipped instructions. His anger didn't need volume. I sat and noticed my legs trembling. The gown felt like sandpaper. I pictured Lily asleep and wanted to sprint to her, but I couldn't outrun what Vale had witnessed. I listened to the mansion breathe and understood the war had stepped inside. When Damian finally ended the calls, he faced me as if weighing how much truth I could carry. He admitted he had spent years keeping Ethan's diabetes quiet, not from shame, but from strategy. In his world, vulnerability invites predators, and predators do not care if the weakness belongs to a child. Tonight, Vale had seen the monitor, the gel, the careful urgency, and he would turn it into a story that served him. Damian's voice stayed calm, but I heard the exhaustion underneath, the kind that comes from guarding one life with an entire army, and it should never. Damian's next admission changed everything. His wife had been killed 3 years ago, not by chance, but as a message aimed at him. He said it without drama, like a fact welded into his bones. In that moment, I understood his control, the cameras, the protocols, the way tenderness always came with restraint. He had already learned what happens when enemies identify a weakness and press until something breaks. If love could be weaponized once, it could be weaponized again. Ethan's diabetes wasn't just medical in this world, it was leverage. Vale loved leverage. Grief hit and anger rose hard. I left the study late, crossing halls that smelled of citrus polish and control. Lily slept curled around her bunny, and the sight almost broke me. I sat by her bed and watched her breathe, trying to imagine safety that didn't come with strings. How do you protect your child when the shield is also a cage? Vale's eyes at that doorway replayed in my head, hungry, recording a crisis like evidence. Then my mind jumped to my old neighborhood, my school, my work, the people who still knew where I came from. Dread settled in. Vale would dig. I knew it, and I felt it. In the days after the gala, the house tightened. Ethan pretended he didn't care, but his numbers twitched when cars lingered near the gate. Damian read reports with a jaw set hard enough to crack stone. I carried Lily to breakfast and hated that I kept counting her breaths the way I counted Ethan's. Vale had gained proof in a story, and stories become weapons in rooms like his. I felt the pressure turning toward me, because I was the newest piece on Damian's board. My past was easier to reach than his fortress. Everything I loved sat outside unprotected. I told myself I could handle attention. I'd survived worse streets than a ballroom, but Vale wasn't random. He was patient, funded, and insulted that Damian still stood tall. He wouldn't rush. He would squeeze. I pictured men at my old apartment building, asking polite questions with sharp edges. I pictured a stranger near my classmates in the library, watching who spoke to me. I pictured Miss June opening her door to someone who smiled too nicely. The images chilled me. I had stepped into Damian's world to protect Ethan and Lily, and now my own history felt reachable too. The next morning, Ethan's monitor beeped while he brushed his teeth, and I flinched like the gala never ended. It was a normal alert, but nothing felt anymore. Damian listened to updates at breakfast, tightening plans without raising his voice. Mrs. Alvarez kept Lily laughing, and that sweetness hurt. I caught myself scanning windows and mirrors, expecting Vale's shadow everywhere. When Lily asked why I looked tired, I kissed her forehead and forced calm into my face. Calm is a skill, like nursing, like survival. Deep down, I knew Vale would not wait. He had seen the crack, and he would come for the nearest edge. Me. That is how the gala ended for me, not with speeches, but with a doorway full of eyes and a promise of consequences. Vale had seen Ethan's weakness, and he had seen mine, because I was the one who kept the boy upright. He now knew I mattered. I felt it like a storm under my ribs. My old life was still out there, soft and unguarded, full of people who would open their doors if someone asked nicely. Vale would ask nicely. He would send someone who looked harmless. And when the first neighbor got questioned, I would know. The morning after the gala, the mansion felt louder even when it was quiet. Footsteps seemed measured, doors closed softer, and every camera blinked like an eyelid that never slept. Ethan ate breakfast with his shoulders tight, pretending the night hadn't mattered, while I kept watching his monitor the way you watch a storm line on the horizon. Lily hummed over her cereal, safe inside the walls, and that innocence made my stomach ache. I thought about Vale's eyes in the doorway, how they recorded Ethan's collapse like a receipt. I'd walked into this house for a job. Overnight, I became a target with a history, a child, and a trail of ordinary people behind me. If danger can follow you through chandeliers and silk, what chance does it give the rest of your life? Noon proved the rules had changed, and my past became a piece on their board. That afternoon, Noah Reed brought Damian a report, and I was asked to sit while it was summarized. Vale's people had shown up at my old row house building, wearing clean coats and polite faces, asking the kind of questions that sound harmless until you hear them twice. They wanted to know when I moved, who watched Lily, whether I had family, whether I ever mentioned a boyfriend, whether I owed anyone money. Another team had lingered near my community college, watching the library doors where my study group used to meet. Someone even called Lily's old daycare, pretending to verify enrollment, fishing for addresses and schedules. Hearing it laid out like a checklist made me nauseous. My past wasn't just memories anymore. It was a map, and Vale had started tracing every line that led to me, hoping one would lead to Ethan too. I could almost feel his eyes. I kept seeing faces from my old life, bright and ordinary, suddenly standing under a spotlight they never asked for. Miss June Haskins, with her sticker sheets and librarian patience, opening her door to strangers because she still believes manners mean safety. The corner store cashier who used to slip Lily an extra lollipop when I paid in coins. Tasha, my study buddy who shared flashcards and bad jokes during late lab nights. Marisol, the daycare worker who braided Lily's hair and wrote little notes about her day. None of them knew Damian Cross. None of them cared about Graham Vale. They just knew me as the tired girl who tried. The thought of Vale's men circling them made my anger flare hot and clean. I wanted to scream that my poverty wasn't an invitation to be used. How is it fair that kindness becomes a target? I felt guilty breathing. Damian listened to my outrage without interrupting, and that calm made it worse, like he had already predicted my pain. When the report ended, he laid out 2 paths with the same precision he used for Ethan's care. One was exit, a large payment, enough for me to finish my degree somewhere far from Philadelphia, and a break before Vale's pressure tightened. The other was stay, remain inside his protection, and he would extend that protection to the people connected to me, quietly, efficiently, without asking them to understand why. He didn't frame it as a threat, but it landed like one because the world had already changed. I stared at him and realized choice can be shaped until it becomes a hallway with one door. What would you pick if leaving meant abandoning a boy who could crash without you, and staying meant letting him quietly reorganize my life? I heard the manipulation immediately. Leave with money, and Damian's hands are clean if Vale moves on my neighborhood. Stay, and he keeps every string in his fist. But I also heard the truth under it. He was offering the only shield he believed would work. Running would not erase the footage, the whispers, or Vale's curiosity. It would only move Lily and me into a smaller, lonelier corner, with no walls. And I couldn't picture Ethan's face when his numbers drop. The moment he tries to act tough while his body betrays him, and walk away from that. In weeks, he had become more than a job. He had become a kid I cared about, stubborn and grieving and alive. So I told myself I was choosing, even as my chest admitted I was cornered. Have you ever agreed to something because every alternative felt like another danger too? Damian didn't let my decision sit. The next morning a car arrived carrying my nursing advisor, Professor Elaine Porter, looking bewildered in her sensible coat as she stepped into a mansion she'd only ever driven past. I watched her eyes widen at the ceilings and the quiet men stationed like furniture. Damian met her privately, then brought me in and presented the outcome as if it were standard paperwork. My course sequence would be accelerated. Tutors would come to the estate. Clinical rotations would shift to facilities with stronger security. Scholarships would cover the remaining tuition. My schedule would be rebuilt around Ethan's needs. Professor Porter nodded, dazed and grateful, and I felt my stomach sink. I hadn't asked for any of it. It was happening because Damian could. In that moment, I understood the offer was not only employment, it was a network tightening around my future each day. Within a week, my textbooks were joined by glossy binders delivered to my suite, and a private tutor appeared at the dining table like it was ordinary. My clinical placement changed too. Shifted from the city hospital to a smaller practice tied to Damian's companies, where cameras sat beside hand sanitizer. Professor Porter sent a revised plan that looked like a miracle and felt like a cage. The nursing program received a donation, and suddenly doors opened that had always stayed shut for girls like me. I should have been grateful. Part of me was. Another part recognized the trade. My education, my future license, my entire path now ran through Damian's infrastructure. If I left, I wouldn't just lose a paycheck. I'd lose the scaffolding holding my ambitions up. That is how dependency is built, not with chains, but with convenience and with rescue that makes the cost hard. That was the shift I couldn't unsee. The moment I felt turn 11 inside my ribs. Damian wasn't only protecting Ethan from Vale. He was protecting his own ability to control the board. He couldn't control Ethan's pancreas, and he couldn't control Vale's obsession, but he could control me by building my life around his walls. I started to sense that I was the variable he watched most closely, not because he distrusted my care, but because he needed to know where I would land if the ground moved again. His attention felt like gravity, silent, constant, shaping how everyone else moved. When he spoke about safety, I heard fear underneath, sharp as winter air. Losing his wife had taught him that love is a doorway enemies kick in. Now he was trying to brick up every doorway, including mine, before anyone could reach Lily. I didn't know how to. I tried to picture leaving anyway. A different city, a smaller apartment, Lily starting over, me finishing school under a new name. The image should have felt like freedom, but it felt like running through snow with someone behind you. Vale already had my face and my background. If he wanted to press, he could press anywhere, and I would be alone. Staying meant walls and watchers, but it also meant Ethan had a steady hand when his body spiraled. It meant Lily slept without sirens. It meant Miss June and Tasha and Marisol might be guarded without ever knowing why. I hated that the safest option came with a man deciding my schedule. I hated that I was relieved anyway. In the end, I didn't sign with ink. I signed with silence and the daily choice to stay. Not because it was right, but because my kids needed steadiness. The cruelest part was watching Lily bloom. Within days, she stopped waking at every creak, stopped asking if the landlord would knock, stopped flinching at distant sirens. Mrs. Alvarez taught her to help stir soup, and Lily took pride in being trusted with a wooden spoon like it was a trophy. The playroom had books with unbroken spines and crayons that weren't snapped in half. She laughed louder here, laughs that made staff smile. I should have celebrated, and I did, quietly, but the comfort hurt. It came from locks and money and men like Noah positioned near the stairs. It came from Damian's decision to wrap my child in his protection, whether I liked the cost or not. I held Lily at bedtime and felt gratitude and fear tangled together like hair after a windy day. If safety makes your child happier, does it excuse the freedom you lose? Ethan noticed Lily's ease too, and it softened him in places he tried to keep hard. One evening he helped her build a puzzle at the kitchen island, acting annoyed while secretly enjoying her chatter. I watched them and felt something dangerous, a flicker of home. Not the kind you inherit, but the kind you build out of routines, shared snacks, and the relief of not being alone. Then I remembered the locked doors, the whispered names, the cars that had tailed us, and the warmth turned bittersweet. Damian's world could offer shelter, but it could also demand loyalty like rent. I began keeping a second list in my head. Not bills this time, but rules. Don't repeat what you overhear. Don't wander after dark. Don't forget the kit. Don't trust a smile too easily. I hated that the list made me calmer. I hated that calm felt like belonging. I could feel Vale's pressure building beyond questions. Surveillance is a hand on your shoulder, and sooner or later it squeezes. Damian's security tightens schedules and routes. But no wall can guard every memory I left behind. At night, I lay awake imagining Miss June answering her door, Tasha walking to her car after class, Marisol locking up daycare, all of them unaware they were now leverage. I wasn't naive about escalation, and neither was Damian. Vale would not stop at polite inquiries. He would choose an innocent, someone soft, and use them as bait to force a reaction. That realization sat in my throat like ice. The next morning felt too calm, the kind that comes right before glass shatters. I kissed Lily's hair, packed Ethan's kit, and promised myself I would stay alert. I didn't know how. I only knew it was coming and it would hurt someone. That morning started almost gentle. Lily padded into the kitchen in mismatched socks, holding her bunny by one ear, asking for cinnamon on her oatmeal the way she did now that she felt safe enough to have opinions. Mrs. Alvarez hummed while she stirred, and Ethan pretended he didn't care, scrolling his phone while his monitor beeped soft reminders against his wrist. I packed his kit anyway, lining up tabs in a juice box like a ritual. For a few minutes, the house felt like a place where kids just grew, not survived. I let myself breathe and believe it. Then the calm snapped. Noah appeared in the doorway, face tight, and the kitchen temperature seemed to drop. He didn't speak to Lily, only nodded to Mrs. Alvarez, and motioned me out with that urgent stillness I'd learned to fear. In the hall, my phone vibrated, then went silent, as if even the signal knew to hush. I was brought to Damian's study, where screens glowed and men stood too straight. Before anyone said a name, I already felt it. Someone from my old life had been touched. My stomach clenched, and I pictured Miss June's eyes at her door. Damian's security chief summarized the breach in clipped phrases, but all I heard was Miss June Haskins and taken. My neighbor, Lily's sticker lady, the woman who kept spare cocoa packets for bad days. Vale's people had grabbed her near my old building, fast and quiet, leaving nothing but a missing scarf and an unanswered phone. The room blurred at the edges. This wasn't random cruelty, it was arithmetic. Vale couldn't reach Damian through stone walls, so he reached through me. Rage burned up my throat, followed by guilt so heavy it felt like bruises. I wanted to scream now. Damian laid out Vale's intention without raising his voice. Miss June was bait, held at an abandoned warehouse, meant to pull security away from the estate. If the guards chased the rescue, Vale's second move would hit here, where Ethan's routine lived. I looked toward the hallway that led to Ethan's room and felt my heart bang against my ribs. Damian's usual pattern was layers of men and distance, but today he broke it. He said he would go himself, while Noah and the main team stayed to seal the house around Ethan. It was risky, and it felt unexpected. I didn't beg to be included. I insisted with the kind of calm that comes from motherhood, the calm you find when a child's safety is on the table. Miss June was not a soldier in their war. She was an elderly woman who loved crossword puzzles and kept peppermint candies in her coat pocket. If Vale could take her because I had tried to survive, then none of my kindnesses were safe. I thought of Lily's face at bedtime, the trust in her eyes, and I knew my line had hardened into action. We were going. No hesitation time. Damian handed me a small device that fit in my palm, smooth and heavier than it looked. He explained what it would do if I pressed it, how fast his people would converge, how the signal would cut through any dead zone. He didn't call it a weapon. He called it insurance. The instruction attached to it was simple. If something happened to him, I was to press and keep moving. Then he added the priority that made my throat tighten. Miss June out first, no matter what, even if I had to leave him behind. I nodded and steady. Noah stayed at the house with extra men, and I caught a glimpse of Ethan at the stairs, pretending indifference while his fingers worried his monitor strap. I wanted to hug him, but there was no time for softness. Mrs. Alvarez held Lily in the doorway, whispering reassurance with her eyes, and I sent Lily a kiss she couldn't see. The car rolled out under gray sky, tires whispering over frozen gravel. Damian sat beside me, silent, reviewing routes and timings like a surgeon reviewing incisions. I kept my hands in my lap so he wouldn't see them shake today. The warehouse sat by the river in a strip of Philadelphia that felt abandoned by daylight. Broken windows stared at the street, and the air smelled like cold metal and old oil. Inside, dust hung in the beam of Damian's flashlight, turning every breath visible. Shipping containers formed narrow corridors, and rusted machinery loomed like sleeping animals. Damian moved first, stepping where he wanted me to step. Hand signals minimal, pace steady. I mirrored him, hyper-aware of my own noise. The squeak of my boots, the swallow in my throat. Protection had teeth here, and I walked into its mouth. Somewhere deeper, a drip echoed with slow patience. My pulse matched it for a moment, then raced ahead. Damian's calm was unnerving. The way he seemed to listen, weighing silence like evidence. I kept thinking about Lily and Ethan, about how I wasn't trained for corners like this, and yet my feet kept moving. I told myself I was a nursing student, a mom, a woman who carried snacks for Lowe's, not courage for ambushes. But Miss June's face kept appearing, the way she smiled when Lily learned a new word. I refused to let that smile become collateral. Inside a cramped office, we found Miss June. Peeling paint, a wobbling desk, dust on everything. She sat tied to a chair, glasses skewed, hair pinned back like she was heading to book club, not a nightmare. Her chin trembled, but her eyes stayed stubbornly bright. Relief hit so fast I tasted metal. I dropped beside her and loosened the knots, hands shaking, refusing to make noise that could draw attention. When the rope finally slipped free, she gripped my sleeve with strength. I guided her up, wrapped my coat around her shoulders, and promised she would get out with us. Damian took the doorway, body angled to shield the hall, attention sharpened into predator calm. He signaled me to take Miss June and move fast, his eyes fixed on the darkness between containers. I tucked her arm over my shoulder and felt how light she was, how easily the world can toss an elderly woman around. We moved down a narrow passage, my boots whispering on concrete, her steps small and uneven. She tried to apologize, but I kept her focused on breathing. Behind us, footsteps shifted, and a metallic click echoed. I did not look back. I moved forward. We were close enough to feel outside air leaking under a loading door when someone stepped into our path. Graham Vale took his time, letting the dim light reveal him. Tailored coat, composed smile, eyes that never warmed. In his hand was a dark, unmistakable weapon, kept low and visible like a signature. My body flashed hot, then cold. Miss June sagged against me, and I tightened my hold. Vale's gaze traveled over her, then pinned me, patient and pleased. He had chosen her because she was soft, and he had chosen me because he wanted to watch me bend. Time slowed the way it does in emergencies, when your brain starts sorting outcomes like files. I shifted my stance and placed myself between Vale and Miss June, not dramatically, just enough that my body became the first obstacle. I kept my voice inside my chest, steadying myself the way I do when Ethan's numbers dive. Begging would feed him, panic would entertain him. I forced my face into calm, held his gaze, and let my thoughts run cold. Lily's safety, Ethan's safety, Miss June's safety. 3 lives, 1 breath at a time. I stood there and refused to flinch. In that stretched second, I made a calculation I hated. Vale didn't want a body on the floor. He wanted leverage he could trade, pressure he could apply. If he harmed me, he would lose the tool he was using to pry at Damian, and he would invite retaliation even his allies might not enjoy. If he harmed Miss June, he would look reckless, and reckless men get abandoned. He needed me alive and useful. He needed her as bait, not a headline. I held his gaze and let the logic show in my stillness. My face stayed blank anyway. Vale's smile flickered, not gone, just adjusted, like he'd met resistance he hadn't expected. The weapon stayed low, but his wrist tightened, and I saw him weighing me. Miss June trembled against my side, and I anchored her with my shoulder, breathing slow so she could borrow it. I thought of Lily's oatmeal, of Ethan's monitor beeping like a tiny alarm, of how all this started with me helping a boy in an alley. Vale was waiting for pleading. I gave him stillness instead. The calm he couldn't manipulate landed between us, and it made him hesitate for the first. A sound moved behind Vale, soft as fabric. Not footsteps, presence sliding into position. The air seemed to lower a degree, and Vale's eyes darted past me a second before returning. That break told me everything. Damian was closing in. I didn't turn. I kept my body steady, keeping Miss June covered, because turning would admit fear. In the corner of my vision, darkness shifted along a wall, and my skin prickled with the certainty that the trap was tightening, not on me, but on Vale. He had come here to control the scene. Now the scene was controlling him. Miss June's fingers clutched my sleeve, and I felt her trying to stay brave for me, which made my chest hurt. I slipped one hand into my coat pocket and touched the beacon, not pressing, just confirming it was there, a thread to the people waiting beyond these walls. I thought of Ethan back at the mansion, guarded and fragile, and of Lily with her bunny, unaware how close fear had come. Vale shifted his weight, smile thinning, reconsidering. My refusal to panic had bought something precious. It had bought time, and time was currency that could change scene. Vale's eyes flicked toward the darkness behind him, and the weapon dipped a fraction, not lowered, just uncertain. I held my position, shoulders squared, breathing slow, as if I were in a hospital room instead of a trap. "Miss." June leaned into me, and I adjusted without stepping back. The exit was still there, cold air waiting, but we couldn't reach it until Vale moved. His hesitation stretched, thin as ice, and I felt the whole warehouse listening. Somewhere close, a shadow shifted with purpose. I didn't need to look to know Damian was near. The breath would decide everything. Damian's instruction repeated, "Miss June first." I tightened my hold, set to move the instant Vale gave space. His smile tried to return, but it looked strained, charm without belief. He kept glancing toward the darkness behind him, and that told me the balance had shifted. The warehouse felt like it was holding its breath. I stayed silent, giving him nothing to twist, letting him feel how little control he had left. The weapon wavered. Then the air behind him changed, the way it changes before thunder. I didn't need to see Damian to know the moment belonged to him. Vale's wrist wavered, and that tiny dip in his weapon was the first crack I had seen in his perfect composure. "Miss." June clung to my sleeve, trembling, her peppermint breath sharp in the cold air leaking under the loading door. I kept my body between them, knees bent, not heroic, just steady. My fingers brushed the beacon in my pocket, ready, but I did not press. In the dim, a shadow shifted behind Vale, and the whole warehouse seemed to inhale. I felt Damian before I saw him. It was the same pressure as thunder, quiet, inevitable, and close. He stepped from the darkness with no wasted motion, coat hanging open, hands low and empty, as if he did not need to prove anything. The light caught his face and made it look carved, calm enough to be cruel. Vale turned, trying to recover his smile, but Damian's presence erased the room's rules. I watched the way Damian planted his feet, angled his shoulders, and claimed the line between us and the exit. Without raising his voice, he let Vale understand he had been tracked, anticipated, and boxed in. Even the dust seemed to settle around him at once. Damian spoke in that restrained, lethal calm I had learned to fear more than shouting. He named what Vale had done, not as drama, but as charges. Hunting a child's illness, dragging an elderly woman into a trap, and reaching for anyone under his protection. Vale tried to answer with charm, but the charm kept slipping, because Damian did not react like a cornered man. He reacted like the corner itself. I felt the power shift in my stomach, the way you feel an elevator drop, sudden and undeniable. Vale's weapon stayed visible, yet his confidence thinned with every breath. Damian gave me a single glance, and I understood my job was movement, not argument. I tightened my arm around Miss June and began edging sideways toward the loading door, keeping my body between her and Vale. My heels slid on grit. "Miss." June's knees shook, but she kept trying to stand tall, as if dignity could warm her bones. I whispered reassurance without words, breathing slow so she could borrow it. Behind us, Damian held Vale in place using nothing but stillness. How strange that silence could feel like a wall you could lean on when fear wanted sound. Vale's eyes darted, searching for an angle, for a hostage, for any script where he stayed in control. Damian denied him each option by anticipating the move before it happened. A second shadow appeared at the edge of light, then another. Men from Damian's team slipping into positions that made the warehouse feel smaller for Vale, not for us. Vale's breathing changed. His smile became an effort. Damian did not lunge or shout. He simply closed the distance by inches, forcing Vale to recognize that every exit had already been claimed. In that moment, Vale overreached, and he knew it. Damian's attention stayed on Vale while mine stayed on Miss June's balance. I guided her through the doorway, into the bite of outside air, and the sound of our footsteps suddenly felt too loud. A vehicle waited beyond the loading bay, lights low, engine steady. I helped Miss June into the back seat, tucking my coat around her like a blanket, then climbed in beside her because leaving her alone felt unthinkable. My hands finally started shaking, delayed and unstoppable. I imagined Lily's face if Miss June had not come home, and the thought made me swallow a sob whole. The ride to the clinic blurred into dark streets and quick turns, but the car felt like a moving safe room. Miss, June kept apologizing in broken phrases, blaming herself for being old, for opening her door, for trusting the wrong kindness. I held her hand and tried to pour warmth into her fingers. It should never have been on her to know predators. That was my guilt, my consequence. I kept thinking of Vale's eyes, how he chose the sweetest target to prove a point. Relief came because I knew the war would answer our rescue with something else. The private clinic hid behind plain brick, the kind of building you pass without noticing. Security met us at the door, quiet and efficient, and moved Miss June to a warm room where a nurse checked her vitals and offered tea. I stayed until I saw color return to her cheeks and the tightness leave her jaw. A doctor outlined observation and rest, and guards took posts outside her door, as if it were normal. My relief tasted bitter. Lily would be safe tonight, but her safety now lived inside Damian's system. Not in my own hands for now, anyway. When I returned to the estate, the gates looked taller than before. Lily was already asleep, Bunny tucked under her chin, unaware of how close the world had come to swallowing someone she loved. I sat by her bed and let my body shake in silence, the late crash of adrenaline. Down the hall, Ethan's monitor beeped steady, and gratitude stabbed through me. Later, Damian entered his study, coat dusted with grime, face unreadable. He checked on Miss June with a quick call, then looked at me as if I were the only loose thread left in the whole house. I waited until the house quieted, until Noah's updates faded, and Ethan finally slept. Then I asked the question that had burned since the warehouse, the one I could not swallow with gratitude. In Damian's world, saving Miss June and me had been optional. Protecting Ethan was the rule. So why had he chosen the harder path, risking himself and shifting security patterns, instead of cutting losses? I could hear my own voice in my head, steady but shaking underneath, like I was confessing a fear I hated. Damian listened without interrupting, and the stillness between us felt too personal. He answered with restraint, not drama. In his world, he said, logic demands sacrifice, turning people into pieces you trade to protect the king. That logic had stolen much from him. He reminded me of the night I found Ethan in the alley, when I stopped for a stranger and did the hard thing without asking what I would gain. To him, that courage was a kind of strength he saw too little. He told me he could not watch it be punished. Protecting Ethan remained his center, but protecting me and Miss June now belonged inside the same promise. His confession landed like a hand on a bruise. What does it mean when the most dangerous man you know chooses kindness over efficiency? I tried to label it strategy, but I kept seeing the moment he broke pattern to save an old woman and a nurse. I pictured Lily, safe upstairs, and my anger at Vale hardened into a vow to keep innocence out of this war. Damian's gaze stayed on me, unreadable, and for one breath I felt the boundary between employee and something personal blur. That blur scared me more than the warehouse in a new way. Damian returned to procedure, but the air stayed changed. He offered water, then stood close enough that I caught cold wind and clean soap on his coat. He kept his hands to himself, as if touch was a weapon he refused to misuse. Beyond the door, the mansion settled into quiet, yet the warehouse still rang in my ears. Miss June was safe. Ethan was guarded. Lily slept. I stood there with Damian Cross and a truth I could not unlearn. His protection was not only control, it was choice. That made it more dangerous than anything I had expected. After he left, I walked to my suite like I was borrowing my own legs. My mind replayed the warehouse. Vale's hesitation, Damian's stillness, rescue that felt like mercy and warning. I checked Lily, smoothing her hair, then checked Ethan from the hall, listening for the beep that meant he was safe. Only then did I breathe. I realized I trusted Damian more now, and that trust scared me. In my old world, trust was rare. In this world, trust could be a tether. I lay awake, asking if I had stepped closer to salvation or deeper into the trap. Miss June would wake in a guarded room, and Lily would ask when she could bring her a drawing. Ethan would act tough, then flinch at sudden sounds. I kept packing kits, checking locks, counting costs that never appear on bills. I wondered what you would do in my place. Would you accept protection that reshapes your life? Would you trust a man whose kindness feels as dangerous as his power? Vale crossed a line by choosing an innocent, and Damian answered without spectacle. The satisfaction of that answer did not erase fear. It only clarified stakes for us all. That night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself at Damian's study door, not summoned, just pulled. The mansion was quiet, but my pulse still remembered the warehouse. Damian sat with the lights low, studying reports as if he could tame chaos with paper. When he looked up, his gaze softened, and my breath caught. The rescue had changed more than Vale's confidence. It had changed the space between Damian and me. Trust felt real now, and real things can shatter. I stepped inside anyway, because sometimes the scariest door is the one you choose to open for me. My hands did not stop shaking when I left Damian's study door and stood in the hallway alone. The warehouse dust was still in my nose, and my muscles kept replaying the moment Vale hesitated, like my body refused to believe we were alive. I washed my palms twice in the guest bathroom, watching the water turn clear, but my pulse stayed loud. Somewhere upstairs, Lily breathed in her sleep, and down the hall, Ethan's monitor hummed steady. Relief should have been simple. Instead, it felt sharp, like safety after danger can cut you when they tell you it's over. I thought I understood fear. I have carried it through late shifts and empty fridges and nights when the rent notice slid under my door like a threat. But this was different. This fear came wrapped in protection, offered with a steady hand and a quiet promise, and that made it harder to fight. Trusting Damian felt like stepping onto thin ice that could hold or break without warning. Part of me wanted to run before feelings formed. Another part asked, "Have you ever been offered a kind of safety that scares you more than danger?" I had no answer. Damian stayed in his study after I questioned him. Not chasing me, not ordering me, just letting the truth settle. Then he spoke again, softer, as if he was choosing each word the way he chooses where to place guards. He let me see that the mansion had been a shell since his wife died, a place built to defend a memory that could not be brought back. He said the rooms went silent for years, and that silence started to loosen only after Lily's laughter echoed down the stairs, and my footsteps joined the morning routine like breath returning. I didn't know what to do with that confession. I stood there, arms folded, trying to look like a professional, while my chest kept reacting like a woman who had been alone too long. Damian moved closer, not invading, just closing the distance until I could feel the heat of him in the cool room. His hand lifted, careful, and he touched my cheek with the lightest pressure, as if asking permission without words. The gesture was brief, almost nothing, yet it landed like an anchor. My breath caught, and the silence felt louder than any siren outside guarded walls. He pulled back, leaving me space to think, and then he made vows in the same steady tone he uses for plans. He promised Lily would never be collateral, not for Vale, not for anyone hungry for leverage. He promised Ethan would never be used as bait again, and that his illness would be protected like a private truth, not paraded for politics. I listened and measured him the way I measure medication doses, looking for side effects and hidden costs. Yet restraint felt real. He was not asking for my submission. He was offering a shield and admitting its weight. I told myself I would not confuse gratitude with surrender. I am still Mia Carter, still a nursing student with exams to pass, still Lily's mom before anyone's employee. In my head, I set boundaries like lines on a chart. My child's needs first, my education not erased, my voice not swallowed by his power. Damian listened as if he respected the line, even when he could have crossed it. I admitted that leaving no longer felt like safety, only distance. And distance can be breached. So I chose to stay for now. Eyes open, pen in my hand still. That choice did not feel romantic. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and deciding to build a house there anyway, because the ground behind me was already crumbling. Damian's world had danger outside the walls and rules inside them, and I was learning that tenderness could be another rule, another test. I wanted to believe this was the start of healing, but I knew love in his orbit could be used against us. The thought made me protective and reckless. I pictured Lily's face, Ethan's pride, and Damian's hand retreating before it asked for more again. Damian stayed controlled even when he let the cracks show. He did not plead for my trust. He offered it and waited. I caught grief in the way his gaze drifted to a framed photo, then away, as if memory could cut. I caught fatigue in the silence he carried, the silence that made Ethan grow up too fast. When he admitted the house had started to breathe again since Lily and I arrived, I believed him, because I felt it too in tiny things. Lily singing, Mrs. Alvarez humming, Ethan letting me check his monitor without flinching or arguing. After that, the room held a kind of silence, one that felt chosen instead of enforced. Damian's hand hovered near mine on the desk, close enough that I could feel the question. I did not take it, not yet, but I let my fingers rest beside his, acknowledging the pull without giving up control. In my head, I repeated my rules. In my chest, I admitted I wanted to be held, not grabbed. There is a difference, and I needed him to respect it. He did. He stayed still, and that stillness felt like consent. It made my eyes sting. When I finally stepped back, I felt like I had crossed an invisible line, not into romance, but into something riskier, mutual responsibility. Damian's vow about Lily and Ethan wasn't a fairy tale. It was a contract written in breath and choice. I told him, inside my own thoughts, that I would keep earning my independence, keep my education moving, keep my child's joy protected from this darkness. He seemed to accept that I would not be owned. Still, I knew the outside threat hadn't vanished. Vale would regroup. The difference was that we were aligned. I felt it everywhere. I left his study with my skin humming, like the house had shifted. I watched Lily sleep, Bunny tucked under her chin, and I felt gratitude that scared me. I checked Ethan from the hall, waiting for the steady beep that meant he was stable. For years, my plan has been a suitcase by the door. Tonight, my hands skipped the suitcase and reached for planner and anatomy notes, snacks, the routines that keep kids calm. That choice felt like comfort and surrender at once. It meant I was building a new normal inside a place that had teeth now. Before I slept, I looked out the window at the dark lawn and imagined Vale somewhere else, plotting, pride turning into plans. Danger was not gone. It had simply met resistance. Inside the mansion, something new had started. A fragile sense that we could live, not just hide. I knew the next days would be about routines and repairs. Ethan learning to trust his body, Lily growing roots in safer soil, and me finishing school under watchful eyes. I was not naive. I was committed, cautiously, to tomorrow. And tomorrow would start new normal, with its price and its lesson. After the warehouse, the house did not turn soft overnight, but it did turn quieter. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and Mrs. Alvarez sliding warm toast onto a plate like it was a blessing. Ethan started meeting me at the counter without rolling his eyes first. Wrist angled so I could scan his monitor. Then he actually ate what I packed. Lily claimed the big kitchen table for crayons and spelling lists, humming while sunlight crawled across polished wood. Outside the gates, winter still bit, but inside, the rooms finally breathed in a way felt earned, not borrowed. The routines became our medicine. Ethan set alarms himself and stopped trying to prove he could outrun his own blood sugar. When a number dipped, he let me step in early. No drama, no shame, just a quick chew and a steady breath. The panic moments grew rarer, and when they came, he recovered faster because he trusted the plan. He even started asking about my classes, pretending it was annoyance when it was curiosity. I saw it in the small things, him refilling his water bottle, him leaving his kit by the door like he believed tomorrow would arrive. Lily changed the most, and that was the sweetest proof. She slept through the night without waking to imaginary knocks. She picked snacks from the pantry without looking at me to confirm we could afford them. She drew pictures of stick figures under a huge roof and labeled them with crooked letters. Me, Ethan, Mrs. Alvarez, and sometimes Damian, always taller than everyone else. She laughed in the hallway, a sound that used to feel risky in my old apartment. Now it echoed and stayed. Even her shoulders looked lighter, as if her body stopped bracing for loss each day. Damian's protection shifted too, almost imperceptibly, like the way ice melts without announcing it. He still ran security, still kept routes and cameras, because the outside world did not become gentle, but the protocol stopped sitting on my throat. He asked before arranging things that affected Lily. He let me take the car to campus with Noah at a distance instead of a shadow at my elbow. He checked on Ethan with quieter eyes, less command, more concern. The mansion remained fortified, yet it no longer felt like it was holding me hostage, and I noticed breath coming easier again. Sometimes I replay the exact instant my thumb hovered over that phone screen in the alley. One word, Dad, and a boy's pale face, and I chose to press call instead of walking away. I did it thinking only of basic decency and my own daughter's bedtime, not knowing I was opening a door that looked like danger. That single decision rewrote every map in my life, where Lily sleeps, where I study, who I trust, and what I can survive. The scariest doors are not always traps. Sometimes they are exits disguised as storms, and you learn later why. Here is what I learned about strength, the kind they never teach you in school or on streets. Power can guard a house, but it cannot make it a home. Protection without compassion becomes a cage, and a cage always demands payment from the innocent. Real strength is choosing who you protect and refusing to let a child's illness become a weapon. It is standing between danger and someone softer, even when your knees shake. It is doing the right thing when it costs you sleep, pride, and certainty. In the end, courage is not loud. It is consistent anyway. I used to think survival meant keeping your head down and your circle small. Now I know community is also a shield. Miss June did not deserve fear. Tasha did not deserve strangers watching her library door. Lily did not deserve to learn that safety is temporary. When Vale chose an innocent, he reminded me how cruel people can be when they treat lives like messages. Damian reminded me of the opposite, that restraint can be mercy. I am wary of his world, but I no longer confuse caution with loneliness. Lily's laughter proves care can rebuild what fear broke. Damian and I did not become a tale. We became a partnership forged under pressure, held together by boundaries and the kids we refused to fail. Some nights we pass in the hallway and the air feels heavier, like words we do not say are standing between us. Other days he steps back and lets me lead Ethan's care, and that quiet respect feels more intimate than any gesture. I keep my independence in my hands, and he keeps his promises in his actions. Outside, rivals still exist. Inside, we practice something radical. Safety that does not demand silence. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Your choices matter even when you feel small. I was a tired mom in a threadbare coat, walking home with $47 and a heart full of worry, and I still had the power to stop and help. That moment did not erase hardship, but it redirected it. It pulled me into danger, yes, yet it also pulled me into a kind of family I did not expect. Strength is not about never being afraid. It is about moving anyway, then building something gentle in the space you saved today. Thank you for staying with me through the cold alley, the ballroom lights, and the warehouse hush. If this story moved you, please hit like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that courage can look ordinary. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I also want to know your choice. If you were in my shoes, would you have run the moment you saw Damian's card? Or would you have stayed to protect Ethan and your people? Your replies mean a lot, and they help this channel keep growing for all of us.